If someone offered you the opportunity to cross an ocean and land in a country where you don't know anyone, but there's the promise that your talents could be planted, take root, and grow into something far bigger than you can imagine, would you accept that opportunity? Sometimes you must relocate from your hometown in order to have your talents recognized and rewarded. That's what happened to a young man born on November 27th, 1942, in Seattle, Washington, which is in the northwestern part of the US. His name was James Marshall, and as a teenager, he discovered his passion for the guitar. Although he was self taught, he was relentless in his passion for music. Eventually, he started performing gigs around the US, yet struggled with obscurity and oftentimes being cheated out of his money. Yet he continued to perform. In fact, he was often banished to playing in the background in small places with small crowds. Struggling for food and shelter, he held on to a promise that he said came to him once in a dream, that he would one day become a star. Then one day in 1966, a British musician saw him perform in New York and was forever changed. Seeing the potential for James's talent overseas, he extended an opportunity for him to relocate to England. James accepted that opportunity and arrived in London with nothing but the clothes on his back and a dime in each of the shoes on his feet. Once he arrived in London, he received help forming a band. 1 year later, in 1967, they were making millions, topping music charts, and had given over 80 performances across Europe. Today, 54 years after his death, James Marshall Hendricks, better known as Jimi Hendrix, is etched in musical history as one of the greatest rock guitarists in the world. Yet, had he not relocated, the world may never have known his talent. I call this phenomenon of having your talents recognized once you've relocated the Jimi Hendrix effect or the Jimi effect. You may be wondering what my connection to Jimi is. His story resonates with me because I also play to the tune of my own guitar. And I've found that relocation has also been a necessary factor in having my talents recognized and rewarded. My career began in 1999 as a chemical engineer. And it didn't take me long to realize that I did not want to spend the next 30 years of my career working in a chemical plant or an oil refinery. Unlike Jimi, I had a job before I relocated, a job that paid me well, but I was absolutely miserable. I had these unorthodox approaches to problem solving, approaches that were often frowned upon, discouraged, and sometimes suppressed. I felt like I was being treated as though I was some sort of voodoo child. But then the wind cried Mary in August of 2004 as a tropical storm swept through New Orleans, Louisiana. I remember being in the kitchen of my home, peering out the window as the waters rose. All of a sudden, I had this intuitive thought that I would not be there 1 year later. As soon as the waters started to recede, I became hyper focused on finding a job somewhere else. I even met a professor at Emory University who told me that the best way for me to get a job in the city that I was considering relocating to was to step out on faith and just relocate there. So I abruptly quit my job, sold my house, and by August of 2005, I relocated to a city that comparatively offered more opportunities, resources, advocates, and money. This is a city that is home to companies like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. This electric ladyland's name is Atlanta, Georgia. By February 5th, 2005, I drove 755 kilometers east from New Orleans to Atlanta. I had nothing but a dream when I arrived in Atlanta. I didn't have a job at that point, just a dream that my talents in engineering and business processes could take root, be recognized, and rewarded. Within a year, I started a business where I could put those very talents to use. 19 years later, I still have that business. In Atlanta, I also found the resources to support me in writing a book, producing a top ranked podcast, and building a team that spans 4 countries. I am convinced that if I had not relocated, my talents could have easily been buried by the sands of time. To be clear, the Jimi effect is more than just about relocating and being rewarded. In fact, the cure for talent suppression is more of a process than it is a formula. And that process begins with asking yourself, are you experienced? And if the answer to that question is yes, then it's an indication that you have talent. Talent is your original experienced ideas in action. Now, there are many paths to take your talent along to success. Many paths, and there are factors that lead you along those many paths. Relocation is just merely one factor. And I want to make sure I'm very clear about relocation. What do I mean by relocation? Relocation is more than just about relocating because of immigration or because a job has relocated you. And this isn't necessarily about relocating because of you want to go to a bigger city or a different country. This is about relocating with the express intent to have your idea or your talent recognized. Other factors include advocates as well as resources. These are the people and the tools that you can leverage to make sure that your talent is actually supported. And then a final but yet very important factor is money. You must be paid fairly. You must be paid your worth. Now, there are many paths, again, on the road to success. Success is how you define it. The more of these factors that you have, the greater your chances are of actually achieving success. Now, only you know whether you have talent. But how do you know if your talent is actually being suppressed? There are a couple of signs. One, people are constantly putting you in the background despite praising you. Two, people may actually recognize your talent, but don't quite know what to do with it or you for that matter, and you end up being not paid your worth. But do you want to know one of the biggest ways to tell if you have talent? You have haters. You know them. They stand all along the watchtower, banishing you, criticizing you, not because you're bad at what you do, but because you're so good at what you do. Your talent is a best kept secret because you're great at what you do. And unless you do something about it, you remain a bird, piercing out as you clutch the iron bars of the professional cage that you've been locked in, desperately waiting, wondering, what would it be like to spread your wings and fly? I've shared 2 stories so far about the positive effects that relocation can have on talent suppression, but there are countless examples. Some of them are very famous people like Tina Turner and Bruce Lee. And then there are examples of others who are not so famous, like the people that I've had the pleasure of interviewing on my podcast. In fact, to support this hypothesis of relocation as a cure for talent suppression, I've collected both firsthand and secondhand data. Some of that firsthand data comes from the following sources. Over the past 6 years, I've had the pleasure of interviewing 218 people, highly successful, high achieving people around the world on my podcast. 73% of them attributed relocation as a factor in their success. I also conducted a poll on LinkedIn where I posed the question, has relocation been a contributing factor to your success? 87% of those who responded said yes. And then over the past 2 years, I have had the privilege of traveling to 9 different countries where I've spoken to different expats. Every single one of them said that relocation was a major factor in their success. You see, when you relocate, almost everything is new about your environment. You have no choice but to rely on your determination and your creativity to succeed. There's also secondhand data that I've read about neuroscience research that supports the positive effects that relocation can have on our mental health. Studies from Science Direct show that when we receive positive feedback and recognition, it actually improves our mental health and it activates reward centers in the brain. This actually helps to reinforce our feelings of competence and self-worth, which allows us to actually hone our talents even more. Now, I know some of you may have your doubts about relocating because there are very real factors that could prevent relocation. Factors like family obligations, physical limitations, or even financial constraints. But I'm not going to let you off the hook that easily. Thankfully, we have the internet, which can transport us to anywhere in the world. And there's no shortage of free social platforms where our talents can be shared. All you have to do is show up consistently, even when you think no one is watching or listening. Relocation is not a guarantee for success, but if the reward for relocating is greater than the risk of staying put and developing talent atrophy, then you have the answer for what you should do. There's another interesting effect of the the Jimi effect. You may find that those very same people that once hated you when you return home, they'll love you. They'll start to say things like, darling, we always knew you could do it. And they'll say or do whatever they can to associate themselves with you. It happened to Jimi when he returned home to the US and began performing at events like Woodstock, where almost 500,000 people attended. And honestly, it happened to me. Some of the same people that once tried to suppress me now praise me for the exact same things. Now, as I approach 50, I'm starting to get that feeling again of relocating so that I can have my more recent talents recognized and rewarded. And it starts right here. It's no accident that I had to cross an ocean to deliver this very talk in Finland, a talk that was buried under 150 rejected applications over 5 years. And though I'm unsure of where I will land next, one thing I can tell you that I am sure about is that when, not if, when that opportunity presents itself, like Jimi, my answer will be a resounding yes. There's a whole world out there waiting to benefit from my talents and yours. Don't allow your talents to be like castles made of sand, easily blown away by suppression. So, now that you know more about the Jimi effect, I'll ask you again. If an advocate offered you the opportunity to relocate so that your talents could take off and you could potentially turn 2 dimes into millions, would you take it?